Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight analyzations, my little fight breakdowns, and my final fight predictions of the fights that are going to be happening tomorrow. Now, what I will personally state is this: I'm very excited for this card. And the reason why I state this is not only because of the main event, honestly, to be quite honest with you, the cards that I'm really the most excited for is not really even the main event because this is just my personal view, but all the other fights on here are relatively great fights except this one. And I know that a certain amount of people that they're going to highly disagree with me on that, but I just don't see this main event being close, just in my personal view, and I will explain why, in my first fight prediction and kind of explain, who I think has the edge. But what I will personally also state is this: unfortunately, with some of these fight predictions, or at least within the last three that I'm going to be talking about, I cannot give my regular in-depth analysis quite as much because I was not able to watch as much fight film as what I really wanted to watch. I was able to only watch a very short amount of it because I was working on other projects and just busy doing other things at the moment, unfortunately. But I will give you guys overall more of a surface level analyzation for some of the other fights and how I more than likely would predict for them to end up. But a lot of these other fights, especially two out of the main four fights, on this undercard, especially the Nick Ball versus Sam Goodman card and also that of the David Adelaide versus Filip Hrgovic fights, those fights, in my personal view, could go either way, but I will explain who I believe is more than likely going to win those fights and why, in my personal view. But let's now get straight into the Dillian Whyte versus Moses Itauma, fight, of course, on the main event. Of course, there's been a lot of news about Moses Itauma as of recent about the next up-and-coming great for the heavyweight division. Now, is he someone that will live up to that hype, or is he someone that is a little bit overhyped at the current moment in time, or someone that will kind of fade out? We'll see. But just in my personal view, this dude right here, Itauma, or Moses Itauma, he's the real deal. He's someone that when I take a look at him out of all the other very decent up-and-coming heavyweight contenders, David Adelaide, Fabio Wardley, some of these other guys, Jared Big Baby Anderson. And this is what I also mean. Like, whenever you hear certain people overall claim that, that Alexander Usyk is a part of this quote-unquote weak era, no, he's not. Now, is that me claiming overall that, that these new fighters, that they're necessarily a part of this same generation? No, they're a part of the new generation. But that being stated, Alexander Usyk still was a part of a very, very competitive heavyweight division, and it still lives on to this day. Not only did you have Tyson Fury and AJ and Dillian Whyte, who of course got several big wins in his career, but Joseph Parker and Andy Ruiz, all those guys were relatively talented, and they were A-grade level fighters. Alexander Povetkin and a certain amount of other guys. But even this up-and-coming heavyweight era, it's going to be very interesting to possibly see if maybe Alexander Usyk could face one of them and possibly beat them, of course, because Usyk is someone that is getting a little bit older. He is aging a little bit as a fighter, as what I thought in his last fight. But that being stated, Moses Itauma, in my personal view, more than likely, he will win this fight. And in my view, more than likely, he's going to win it dominantly. I wouldn't be surprised if there was maybe some competitive rounds or if there were some competitive moments. But when I take a look at Dillian Whyte is someone that, especially after that Tyson Fury fight, he's someone that I'm not going to claim is washed up necessarily, but he's definitely not someone that is the same fighter of what he used to be. He just looks slower. He's someone that, has clearly just lost the peak version of himself in my personal view. And just my personal view of it, Dillian Whyte, even at his best form, would more than likely not beat someone like that of a Moses Itauma. Dillian Whyte is someone that, of course, is very dangerous. He's not the worst boxer in the world. He's got power. He's got a lot of spunk, but he also makes a lot of, technical mistakes. His footwork is very clunky, like his back foot overall, it doesn't really support himself extraordinarily well. His front foot also, it's not really at an angle. It's like completely facing straight forward. His footwork is really not that good. He's someone that can advertise his offense. He's not the quickest of fighters. That being stated, the fact that Dillian Whyte overall was still able to get wins over guys like Alexander Povetkin and Joseph Parker and certain guys like that still shows you how competitive that he's been able to be in that of his career. But I do believe that Moses Itauma will win this fight. I do believe it'll be a dominant performance. I think that eventually he is going to catch Dillian Whyte with something, and I believe that he's probably going to knock him down on a couple of occasions or eventually catch him with something, and it pretty much be a flash knockout. in my personal view. I think that he's more maneuverable of the two. I think that he has more talent. I think that he has definitely better feet. And I think that he's someone overall that is an extremely dangerous counterpuncher, whether he's on the front foot or on that of the back foot. I think that he is extraordinarily dangerous. And he's someone also that has A grade level power. And he's also someone that, it appears anyway, can take a punch. Now, you never know. Sometimes these type of fighters, they get in the ring with a fighter that's experienced, and overall they seem extraordinarily talented. They get in the ring with a fighter that has a lot of heart, maybe that's won some big fights in the past, or at least has a lot of grit, and they end up losing. Who knows? Maybe this fight can end up like Victor Ortiz versus Marcos Maidana, but I just don't personally believe that. And the reason why is because, Moses Itauma, although he still is highly unproven, Dillian Whyte is at more of a downside in his career at the current moment in time, and Moses Itauma is just a star on the rise in my personal view. And Dillian Whyte, especially at his more vulnerable age, I think that it's just going to be a little bit too much for him to get past this guy. I think that Moses Itauma has better boxing ability anyway, and it doesn't even matter if Dillian Whyte was at his absolute peak. Of course, if Whyte was at his absolute peak, I would predict that this fight would be a lot more competitive. But the fact that, once again, that he's a little bit more worn down, and I've not seen the same Dillian Whyte ever since he got knocked out by Tyson Fury, and he was always a little bit hittable and someone that, I'm not going to claim that he's completely chinny, but someone that definitely can be knocked out. And on top of that, he's not someone that's the most fundamentally sound out of fighters that I've ever seen. I have to predict that Moses Itauma more than likely is going to win this fight, and I think that he's going to win it relatively dominantly. I'm just going to state this, and maybe certain people would disagree, but I think that the majority of people would probably tend to agree with me. I don't see this fight really going past that of 5 or 6 rounds. I could be wrong about that, but Moses Itauma is someone that seems to get things done very, very quickly. Of course, that could end up being a problem, but he comes across to me as a fighter, at least when I've seen him get hit by certain fighters in the past. He appears to be a guy that not only is, first of all, elusive and someone that is a bit harder to hit than the average boxer, but he's someone that also can take a punch. Dillian Whyte is someone that I think he can take a punch to a degree, but he's not someone that, has the greatest chins around. He can be knocked down, he can be knocked out. So we'll see what ends up happening here, but I do believe Moses Itauma that he'll get the knockout probably within about a good 5 or 6 rounds, if not even within the first couple of rounds. Wouldn't be surprised whatsoever, but that's my fight prediction for that fight. I do believe that Moses Itauma will get the knockout within that of the first 5 rounds. We'll see. But if this fight does end up going the distance, and if it is especially competitive, but even if Dillian Whyte is able to pull out a few rounds in this fight, Moses Itauma is going to be looked at as a little bit differently, and that is going to be looked at as him having vulnerability. But I do predict that Moses Itauma will win the fight no matter by what means. I think that he's just too young, too fresh, too good. So let's now move on to the next fight, because you now have some other fights, on this card that I think are very, very particularly interesting. Let's now move on to that of Nick Ball versus Sam Goodman. And this is a very, very interesting fight. And, for my initial fight prediction, I was going to assume that Nick Ball was going to win this fight by fight prediction, because what I had seen more on the surface from that of a Sam Goodman, I thought that he was your regular come forward pressure fighter, someone that does not move his head at all, and someone overall that really just does not have an exceptional amount of talent, although he does have good talent. But when I took a look at his recent fights as of recently, against TJ Doheny or some other guys like against, Akeem or Halim, whatever that one American fighter's name was, and some other guys, this guy can really box. Sam Goodman is not someone that, in my view, is just a regular B grade level fighter. This kid is an A grade level fighter. He's someone that moves very particularly well, especially in and outside of the range with his feet. He knows how to use angles and catch you off guard if you get too close inside range. He knows how to occupy the vacated space at times, or at least turn around you in order to kind of get that angle to get certain shots off. He's a relatively quick fighter, someone with a very good lead hand, and someone that has a very good probing lead hand that knows how to set up certain traps and how to kind of set you up for things. Now, is he a fighter that is exceptionally great on that of the back foot? Unfortunately, I can't really state because I didn't have enough time to watch him. He appears to me to be a fighter that mainly comes forward in fights, but he's someone that does it to a very technical and a very masterful degree. He's someone that, overall appears to be a very great boxer, overall within that range. Now, the question will be is that what will his reaction be when Nick Ball ends up pushing him back, overall in the fight? It'll be interesting. But I do think that Sam Goodman, in order to win this fight, that he would have to use a lot of lateral foot movement, that he's going to have to really try, to kind of go after Nick Ball in the early part of the fight and really kind of keep Nick Ball in cruise control. I seen Nick Ball against TJ Doheny. I didn't watch the full fight, but I did see overall certain moments of the fight where TJ Doheny was at least able to kind of keep Nick Ball in the middle of the ring with a very great probing jab. But of course, it didn't really last for long because Nick Ball is someone to where, as they call him, the wrecking ball, you're only going to keep him in that distance for so long. At least unless you know really how to occupy the vacated space, stay off the ropes, and know how to use a great amount of lateral movement. But unfortunately, once again, because of the fight footage that, I wasn't able to watch as much of it, I don't really know how good of a fighter he's going to be on the back foot. And I think that there's going to be times where Sam Goodman, of course, not only is going to have to come forward against Nick Ball, but there's going to be times, overall where he's going to have to use a lot of lateral movement and occupy the vacated space. And although Nick Ball looks like a guy that is very awkward and not always the most technically sound on the surface, he's someone that when you get in the ring against him, it's much easier said than done. And that was even against guys like Ray Ford, who also was on this card, someone that is an exceptional level talent, overall, and boxing at a distance. Excuse me. Nick Ball not only is able to beat certain guys that have come up weight classes like that of a TJ Doheny, but he's also able to beat guys like that are legitimately bigger than him, like that overall of a Ray Ford, and of course he had the draw over, Ray Vargas, I believe his name was, so I mean, Nick Ball is someone that, although he comes across as very awkward, he's someone that usually ends up getting the job done off of volume and off of pressure and off of his level of power. But that being stated, what I will state is this: Sam Goodman is moving up a weight class. Now, Nick Ball, certain people may state, well, Nick Ball, I don't really give him that much credit because he's moving up this guy one weight class. But to be quite honest with you, Nick Ball is not really a natural 126-pounder. He's a little bit girthier and a little bit thicker than, say, maybe some 122-pounders. But that's really more where Nick Ball belongs, especially at, at what, 5'2"? I think like he's a legit 5'2". So what he was actually able to do over Ray Ford and Ray Vargas, the fact that he's still an undefeated fighter and a legitimate champion, that's why I've stated that Nick Ball is a legit A-grade level fighter. And that's why I would love to see his fight over that of a Naoya Inoue. But it's very possible that either fighter could end up winning this fight. If Sam Goodman, of course, like regular, is able to control the range within that of the mid-range and move in and outside, but also use a lot of lateral foot movement, to kind of, upset Ball and, to frustrate him, he just might have a chance to win the fight. He has a great chance to win the fight, overall, if he ends up doing that. But I just don't know if Sam Goodman, at least from what I've seen, I've never really seen anyone, at least, to the fights that I've watched, push him back like that. And Nick Ball will end up pushing you back like that. On top of that, I think it's going to be a level of power and a level of skill and a level of ability that Sam Goodman has never been adjusted to before. Sam Goodman is someone that, of course, in order to win the fight, he's going to have to work off of his great lead hand, try to keep Nick Ball kind of entranced in the mid-range, and then when he gets close to you, tie him up, overall, and then on top of that, use your lateral movement and your angles to try to get around him. He kind of has to do the same thing, to that of a Nick Ball, to what a Crawford probably has to try to do to that of a Canelo Alvarez. But I just don't know if he's going to be able to do it. And then on top of that, although both fighters can be a bit hittable, Sam Goodman, in my view, has less, overall room for error in this fight because Nick Ball is the heavier fighter of the two. He's someone that's adjusted to 122, and he's someone that has A-grade level power. Nick Ball is someone that, has very, very good power. You can tell that, with a lot of what he throws, it's very, very hard. And of course, it's very, it's very solid. So once again, you have to be very, very careful with him. Nick Ball is just extremely strong, especially overall. Like I've seen him move Ray Ford with just literally one arm into the corner to sometimes try to put him, in the corner, and their sizes weren't even really comparable. So Nick Ball just has a whole level of, body strength and power overall that certain people are not used to. Does he have necessarily one-shot knockout power like some other guys do, like an Inoue? Not necessarily, but he's someone overall that still, once again, is very, very, durable. So you got to be very careful. So what is my fight prediction for this fight? If Sam Goodman is actually able to move around that of a Nick Ball and keep him within that of the mid-range, I think that he might have a good chance to win the fight. But that being stated, I think that Nick Ball more than likely is going to win the fight. Excuse me. But I do believe that Nick Ball will be a little bit too much for him. I think that the level of power and the level of pressure is going to be a bit too much for Sam Goodman. Goodman at times also can be a little bit too hittable. Once again, if Goodman can kind of keep Nick Ball entranced within that of the mid-range, then I think overall that he might have a possibility to win the fight. But I do believe that Nick Ball will pull out this fight. I don't know if it's going to be as dominant as what we've seen from other performances, from him in the past, maybe against lesser fighters. But, I do believe that he will win this fight. And of course, this is a title fight because I believe that Nick Ball has a title there at 122 pounds. I do not remember the exact title, maybe the WBA title. But I mean, he has a title there. But anyways, the point overall is that I do assume that Nick Ball is going to win the fight, with him being more adjusted to the weight class, with Goodman at times being a bit too hittable. And I'm not quite sure how he'll handle the back foot and if he'll be able to use enough lateral movement in order to get out of Ball's range. I do believe that Ball will more than likely win the day with his pressure, with his volume, with his size, and with his power. I do believe that more than likely he'll be able to do that. And he's someone that, although, certain things like that might be able to work, it's definitely easier said than done. He has quicker feet than what most people realize, and he's someone overall that once again just makes it very awkward. And if Sam Goodman finds himself trapped up against the ropes a little bit too often here, he will lose the fight, and that is more than likely what I predict. But once again, if Sam Goodman actually uses a great amount of lateral movement, once again, I've not seen enough of him to know how he fights when a fighter approaches him like that. But if he's able to do that, then he has a great chance to win the fight, and this is a fight that truly could go either way. But up until then, because I don't know if Sam Goodman can do that or not, I'm going to predict more than likely that of a Nick Ball in order to win the fight. By that, more than likely of a unanimous decision, maybe even a split decision, but I'm going to go with unanimous decision. I assume that this is a 12-round fight, obviously, because it's a title fight. So I'm going to assume that Nick Ball probably wins this fight about 8 rounds to 4, maybe a little bit more dominantly. I'm going to assume that, but we'll see. Sam Goodman is someone that can legitimately box. He feints. He's someone that has a great lead hand. He definitely can make this fight very awful for that of a Nick Ball. And would I be surprised if this fight went either way? Wouldn't be surprised at all. But I'm going to be, going towards Nick Ball. But let's now move on to the final 2 cards, of course, that we're going to be talking about here. And the next one overall, unfortunately, I have the least amount of homework kind of done on, but I'll still give, more than likely about, or my analyzation of what I believe will happen in the fight, or who I believe will more than likely win the fight. And the next fight, of course, I believe is that of a Ray Ford versus that of an Abraham Nova. Now, I think that Hrgovic versus Adelaide, it may be sooner on the card than this one, maybe. I'm not sure. Or maybe that is one of the latter cards. I don't know. But anyways, Ray Ford, of course, a very talented contender and former champion at the 126-pound weight class. Nick Ball, of course, was able to recently defeat him in order to get that, I believe, of one of the titles there. Now, of course, this dude, Abraham Nova, if you just take a look at his record on the surface, you would assume, of course, that he's pretty much a journeyman fighter. And I mean, maybe you could call him a journeyman fighter, but he is someone that is very particularly dangerous. He's someone that brings a lot of grit and toughness and a lot of heart into every single fight that he comes in at. He's someone that has relatively quick feet. He's someone that does not have the worst power in the world. He has decent speed, but that being stated, overall, he has shown that usually in every big fight of his career against these A-grade level fighters, that he just has something a little bit short of greatness each and every single time. So I do predict more than likely that Raymond Ford will probably win this fight. But that being stated, what I will state is this. This is a fight that, in my view, could go either way if Ray Ford especially is not prepared or does not take the right strategy. One thing that I've seen from that of a Ray Ford in the Nick Ball fight is that although he had the clear height and reach advantage, and it's hard against Nick Ball because Nick Ball is someone that is more defensively sound and a little bit more technically sound than what people give him credit for. But he's also someone that is extremely powerful and strong for his size, and he's someone that, kind of makes it a little bit more difficult. But Ray Ford also could have used a lot more lateral movement, in my personal view, and used more of the occupy the vacated space tactics in order to possibly be successful against that of a Nick Ball. But even his coach in that fight, was telling him that you're staying inside the range and letting him hit up on you, over a little bit too long. It doesn't matter if his shots are not always landing. And that's what I mean overall when I have certain people that come on my channel and they say, oh, well, if you end up landing more shots in the fight, overall, then you win the fight. That's it. There should be no other standard. No, that's not how it always is. And people don't understand this. When you have a fight like a Ray Ford versus that of a Nick Ball, for example, that's a perfect example of that. Now, at the end, Nick Ball, I do believe, landed the more, effective shots. But in some of those rounds, Ray Ford maybe was possibly landing more punches, or more flush punches. But because Nick Ball was able to hit him so many times, and then on top of that, you can't always tell what punches are landing effectively if you're a judge and you hear the slapping and the power of Nick Ball's punches landing, but you don't hear the same effect from that of a Ray Ford's punches. Then you're going to assume that more than likely at least some of those shots are getting through if you're that of a professional boxing judge. So that's what I mean overall when I state that certain people overall, they don't really understand how to score a boxing fight. That just because the fight stats are similar or the punch stats are similar, or certain things like that, or just because you always land more punches in a round doesn't always guarantee you the round. It also is dependent on how effective your game plan looks, in the fight, and also on top of that, ring generalship, and on top of that, who's landing the more clean and effective blows. So once again, it depends on a multitude of factors, not just one. So, I mean, it is what it is. But Ray Ford was letting Nick Ball kind of, hunt him down a little bit too much in that fight and just letting him pin him up against the ropes a little bit too much or just stay inside the range a bit too much. Now, maybe what the strategy was is that he thought that eventually he was going to wear down and that he just didn't want, to be on the back foot the whole entire time, wearing himself down and, trying to get Nick Ball tired out so he could be successful later on, which did kind of happen, but it was just a little bit too little too late. Because in my personal view and in a lot of people's eyes, Nick Ball won about 5 of the first 6 rounds, and you can't give that up in that of a title fight, not a lot of the times anyway, because if he even comes back and wins to 1 or 2 of the latter rounds in the fight, and in the first half of the fight where he won a lot of the clear rounds, the judges are already in their mind going to state that the momentum is in that of the corner of a Nick Ball. So the point is that, overall, once again, if you even let him take 1 or 2 rounds in the second half of the fight, you lost the fight. And that's why Ray Ford ended up losing that fight, and he deserved to lose that fight. Although it was a fight, in my view, that somewhat could have went either way, but I would claim that if one fighter deserved to possibly win it, I would state that it was Nick Ball. I thought that he did more. I thought that he landed the more effective shots. That being stated, I do believe that Abraham Nova, especially with this fight being on such short notice, and him usually being a little bit advertised with some of his shots, and also staying inside the range a bit too long, I do believe that more than likely that although he'll provide his awkward moments and his strong moments, I do believe that more than likely that Ray Ford will probably win this fight. But that being stated, wouldn't be surprised if it went the other way. I need to see Ray Ford use more lateral movement within this fight. I need to see him handle, someone that at times does bring his A game, and someone that, although he has lost to some of the better fighters in his career, he's someone that oftentimes has gotten split decisions, or someone that has just missed the mark. So could it be maybe, possible this time that he finally pulls out his Juan Manuel Marquez 4th fight appearance performance, like what Juan Manuel Marquez did against Manny Pacquiao in the fourth fight, and was able to finally knock him out, although he was clearly losing that fight, but I mean, and it looked like he was about to get stopped himself. But I mean, it is what it is. Or maybe he wasn't losing the fight. I can't remember. It's been a while since I watched that fight, but he definitely was getting his ass kicked in that final round before he got knocked out against Pacquiao. But anyways, point is that could it be possible that if Ray Ford does not pull out the correct strategy, that he could potentially lose this fight? Is very possible. So he needs to be very, very careful here. Use lateral movement, use your great lead hand, use your legs, use your feet, and try to set this guy off balance. If you're Abraham Nova, of course you want, him up against the ropes, and you want to take advantage of at times when Ray Ford can be a little bit too stagnant. And against the Nick Ball fight, against Nick Ball, he just let him get him up against the ropes or stay inside range a little bit too long. So also use your feet, use the angles, and try to overwhelm him early. Because Ray Ford has shown, at least against Nick Ball, that he can possibly be overwhelmed. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it to the same degree, but Abraham Nova is someone that has power. He has a lot of grit, a lot of heart. He has decent speed, and he's not the worst boxer in the world. Would I claim that he's necessarily an A-grade level boxer? Not necessarily, but he's someone that is almost on the brink of it. There's always one fighter, per generation, or one fighter per weight class that is extraordinarily tough and isn't quite on the same level as everybody else. But you always know that when they're going to fight that guy, nobody really wants to fight them, because they're like, oh shit, I have to really prepare for this fight. Because this guy, although technically he's not as good as some of the other guys that I've seen, he's going to really bring everything out of you. Sean Porter overall was kind of like that, but to a more elite degree. Yordenis Ugas was kind of like that for the welterweight division. There are certain fighters, TJ Doheny, to a certain degree, who we've seen recently fight Inoue and Nick Ball, to a degree, is kind of like that. They're going to bring the best out of you. They're more than likely not going to win those elite level fights, but they're going to bring the best out of you. And if you're not careful, one of these days, they just may be able to pull out that A-grade level win. So you have to be very, very careful, in a fight like this. Or even like for those of you that remember Adrian Granados. Granados pretty much got his ass whooped for the majority of his career every time he fought an elite level fighter. But if fighters were not careful, like an Adrian Broner or an Imam, whatever his name was, I can't remember that dude's name, where Adrian Granados was known for getting that, of the upset. I cannot remember. But Amir Imam, I think his name was, or something like that. But anyways, if you're not careful, those type of fighters on the correct night can pull off the upset. So we'll see what ends up happening here. But I do believe that Ray Ford, that he'll more than likely try to move around a bit more in this fight, I believe. And I think that he's someone that is more physically prepared, overall than that, say, of an Abraham Nova. But we'll see overall what ends up happening. It should be a very, very interesting occasion. But I am going to go with that of a Ray Ford by that of a unanimous decision. I do think that it's very possible that it could be competitive. So we'll see overall what ends up happening. But I do think that, Abraham Nova would just be a little bit too hittable, a little bit too rusty, especially for not being fully trained for this fight. And I just think that Ford will just be a little bit too talented. But we'll see. We'll see. But now time to go on to the last fight of Filip Hrgović versus that of a David Adelaide, which is another interesting fight because David Adelaide was someone that, when I took a look at him in the up-and-coming British heavyweights, he was someone that, in my view, was going to be one of the more top talented fighters in the up-and-coming heavyweight class. And he is still extremely talented. But, of course, many people think the same thing about Filip Hrgović, of course. Filip Hrgović is someone that also is excessively talented in certain areas. But both David Adelaide and Filip Hrgović have shown that in some of their bigger matchups that they do have a little bit of an Achilles heel. Filip Hrgović, although he is, highly skilled, he's someone that, in my view, in terms of all-around ability, he's a little bit overrated. He's someone that does not move his head off the center line, nor move his head extraordinarily well. He is extremely hittable, in certain ranges, and he's someone that also does not have an elite level gas tank. He has a terrible, terrible gas tank. And I've seen this overall against Joe Joyce. I've seen it against Zhele Zhang, and I also seen it against that of Daniel Dubois, which is a big part of the reason why eventually the fight, I believe, was forced to be stopped by that of the referee. Now, of course, it was stopped because of a cut, but just taking a look and seeing, overall what would have happened, I'm not really quite sure if Filip Hrgović would have been able to survive that fight anyway. He was starting to get hit with so many great power shots by the time that fight had ended. Filip Hrgović does not have that great of a gas tank, and also the fact that he's hittable could be a major factor within this fight. But the problem also is with David Adelaide is that he's also not someone that has a great gas tank either, at least from what I've seen. The problem is with this fight is that certain fighters, like, when you talk about Hrgović and Adelaide, there's going to be certain things, in my view, that they're more talented than the other in. But I have to go with Filip Hrgović in this fight. And the reason why I state that is because I believe that this is going to be a battle of the wills and a battle of who is slightly more talented. But not only who is slightly more talented, and Adelaide, I think, moves his head off the center line to a better degree, and someone that has better movement, in terms of quicker feet at times, and also in terms of head movement for sure. But the question is that, is he going to be able to keep up with Hrgovic's punching volume the whole entire fight? Because one thing I'll say about Hrgović is this: he doesn't really have the best of gas tanks, but that doesn't necessarily always stop him from throwing. But David Adelaide is not someone that has a great gas tank either. The one big fight I've seen in David Adelaide's career against Fabio Wardley, I thought that he was having some great early success, but by around the fourth round, he already was dog tired. He was someone that really did not have a whole lot of stamina, and it's not like he was just throwing all these punches. So David Adelaide overall is someone that definitely also has a gas tank problem, and the fact that Hrgović has been in the ring with guys like a Danny Dubois and a Zhele Zhang and a Joe Joyce and certain guys like that, I have to go with Filip Hrgović in this fight. Now, if this fight went either way, if there was a knockout, that ended up happening, either way, I wouldn't be surprised at all. But in my personal view, I'm going to go with that of a Filip Hrgović. I believe that the volume of punches and also the fact that David Adelaide, it's a little bit hard to predict because David Adelaide is someone that, in a lot of his, fights, he's only gotten the knockout in like the first to 5 rounds. So I cannot really tell how much more he's improved. And then on top of that, the guys that he's fought, they pretty much haven't been high-level competition. So I'm going to go with Filip Hrgović in this fight. I think that he's experienced, and I think the fact that they're at least similarly talented, and the fact that Hrgović, even though he does not have a good gas tank, I do think that he'll have an even better gas tank than that of a David Adelaide. Adelaide was dog-tired in that fight against Fabio Wardley, and it's not like that was a super high-paced fight. So once again, we'll see what ends up happening. But I do personally think that David Adelaide, overall, although he's highly talented and he has a great chance, he also has great pop in his punches. I think that Hrgovic, there might be a few rounds that he loses, but I think eventually Hrgovic, because he still does have very good boxing ability, I eventually think that he's going to carry the day. And I believe that this fight is, 10 rounds, maybe 12 rounds, but I think it's 10 rounds. I'm just not quite sure if David Adelaide's gas tank overall is going to prove that much. Now, if he can have a much better gas tank than what I've seen in the Fabio Wardley fight, and someone overall that actually can throw consistently, let's say a good solid 20 punches per round, and be relatively accurate, then I might predict him to win the fight. But even then, the fight could still be very, very close. But what I assume is going to happen is that both fighters will have their moments of tiring out. But I believe that Filip Hrgovic will be the one throwing more, have more volume, and sometimes you can just win a fight off of that. I've seen certain fighters that were more talented than the other fighter, but they ended up losing because they just didn't have the gas tank or they weren't active enough. I've seen it a lot. I've seen it with Danny Garcia against Sean Porter, where Danny, although he has great stamina, he's someone that at times does not throw enough. So he ended up losing to probably the lesser talented fighter in Sean Porter, but someone overall that, just gave him much more of a tougher style and someone that was able to throw more and deserved to win the fight. So it is what it is. I've seen it with certain fighters before, so we'll see. But I do assume that Filip Hrgovic will win mainly off of volume and eventually start to break Adelaide down and eventually more than likely start to pull away in the fight. And the fact that Adelaide also is not someone that throws a massive amount of volume in a fight, that also will help out Hrgovic's stamina as well, because he's someone that, overall a lot of times gets tired off of certain fighters that, may throw a little bit more volume or land certain power shots. Now, Zhang and, guys like that of, what's his name? Danny Dubois in the first part of the fight, they didn't always throw a great amount of punches, but eventually Danny Dubois did, and Hrgovic still, I don't remember him being knocked, well, maybe he was knocked down against Dubois, I can't remember, but even then, it's not like he was brutally knocked out, the fight had to be stopped because of the cut. So Hrgovic is someone that, in my view, debatably could be a little bit more durable in this fight, and he's someone that has a higher chance of winning, in my view, but that would be my analyzation. So, in my personal view, the 4 victories that I'm going with Moses Itauma for certain. I'm going with that of a Nick Ball, a fight that could go either way. I'm going with that of a Ray Ford, and I'm also going with that of a Filip Hrgovic. But 3 out of 4 of these fights could easily go either way, in my personal view. But I believe that Moses Itauma, his talent, his power, and the fact that he's just more talented, in my view, than Dillian Whyte, I think that it will carry the day. And I think that Dillian Whyte is a little bit worn down, so we'll see what happens. I think that Itauma is just a little bit too sharp and a little bit too skilled and also a little bit too athletic for someone like a Dillian Whyte, who even at his absolute best was someone that had a little bit of problems, with that of certain, technical, prowess. It just is what it is. And on top of that, he's never been the same fighter after the Tyson Fury knockout. For the Nick Ball fight, that's a fight that could go either way. Nick Ball versus Sam Goodman, but I do predict Nick Ball will win the fight, as I believe that he'll be a little bit more active. At times, he'll push Sam Goodman back, and I don't know if Sam Goodman, with his style, is able to counter that style effectively enough, especially moving up one weight class and not having necessarily a grade level power. Nick Ball does. He's someone that, in my view, is the greater athlete of the two. He's someone overall that does a lot of pressure. He makes things very awkward. And he's one of those fighters, kind of like a Sean Porter or a Joe Frazier, to where, they're not always going to look the most technically sound. But when they do get in the fight with you, you better prepare. Because, they're basically called truth machine fighters. Those guys put everything out of you, or they basically expose everything about you that needs to be exposed, whether you're great or whether you have some cracks in the glass. So we'll see overall what ends up happening there. But I believe that Nick Ball, with his volume and his power, and the fact that Goodman is moving up one weight class, and also I believe that Nick Ball's pressure more than likely will rue the day. I believe that more than likely it will win him the day, but we'll see. As for Rayford versus Abraham Nova, that's a fight that also could go either way, but I assume that Nova would just be a little bit too rusty, and on top of that, I expect Ford to win the fight. I do believe he is the more talented of the two. I expect him to win by that of unanimous decision. And as for that of Hrgovic versus Adelaide, both very talented fighters, talented in different ways. Adelaide is someone that, in my personal view, he has quicker feet and better head movement, which is oftentimes the fighter that I give the edge to. But Hrgovic is someone that has actually been there and is more experienced and proven that at least he can beat some decent class fighters. He's a bit overrated in my view, but he's someone overall that has at least been there and been in the trenches. I'm not sure if Adelaide really has, other than Fabio Wardley, and when he was in the trenches, his conditioning really was not up to par. He did not have a good gas tank. So, I mean, we'll see overall what ends up happening, but I expect Filip Hrgovic and David Adelaide to have a competitive fight. I think that Hrgovic overall is someone that eventually will get Adelaide, either, just by completely wearing him down, or someone overall that once again will eventually just get him. But Hrgovic is going to have to pursue consistently and throw consistently, which usually he does. But he's going to have to be very careful because at times he can let off the gas a little bit. And if he does that, then he'll give Adelaide a great chance to win. But I've seen Hrgovic enough in fights, even fights where he's had a lot of trouble, mainly win the fight basically off of, if not pressure, then at least volume. So I expect Hrgovic, and he doesn't have the best of gas tanks either. But, he's someone that, in my view, can potentially win the fight. And I see him more than likely winning by that of decision or latter round stoppage. So we'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching. We'll see where this goes and talk to y'all later. But my 4-5 predictions, once again, Moses Itauma, Nick Ball, Raymond Ford, and also by that, of a Filip Hrgovic. Those are my 4-5 predictions. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Sorry I could not give as in-depth or as good of an analyzation as what I usually could. Unfortunately, I could not do as much homework on these fights as what I wanted to. But, hopefully I gave enough of one. But anyways, I might try to go live for these fights tomorrow. We'll see. I may not have time, but we'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching, and let me know what you guys think. I'm out for now, and I'll talk to y'all later.